again, everyone. Welcome to Washington Gun Law TV. I am Washington Gun Law President William Kirk. Thanks for joining us. Well, this summer, the summer of 2022, has been quite an eventful one. We've had many, many terrible incidents occur this summer, and then in response to that, we've had many, many terrible pieces of legislation proposed by people who have no idea what they're talking about, which is somehow or another going to solve these problems and save all of our lives. Now, instead of spending the regular time on this video where we're going to dissect some terrible piece of legislation, I thought today we'd do a little refreshing change of pace, talk about a piece of legislation that's being proposed that actually advances the rights of you, the lawful and responsible gun owner. So today, let's spend a few minutes and talk about the bill to remove suppressors from the National Firearms Act. Okay, so the bill that we're talking about today is House Resolution 95. Now, this was sponsored in 2021 by Representative Jeff Duncan out of the 3rd District of South Carolina. Now, this bill purports to do a lot of things if it became legislation. I actually want to spend a few minutes going through this with you because if, and I understand that is a huge if, but if this were to become legislation, this would have a significant impact on the rights of you, the lawful and responsible gun owner. Now, first of all, what does House Resolution 95 does? Well, it does a lot of things, but in a nutshell, what this bill does is it removes suppressors and silencers from the National Firearms Act. Let's go back in our quick little history lesson here. We know in 1934, the National Firearms Act was passed. That regulated all short-barrel shotguns, short-barrel rifles, automatic weapons, other destructive devices, and yes, silencers and or suppressors. That means if you want to buy a silencer or suppressor and do it legally, you will need to fill out a Form 1 if you're building it yourself, a Form 4 if you are purchasing it as is. You will need to get ATF approval, and you will need to pay a $200 tax stamp. If you do not do all of those items, then you are a felon under federal law. Now, many state laws will permit the ownership of silencers or suppressors, Washington State being one of them, so long as the suppressor is properly registered with the ATF. What House Resolution 95 purports to do is to take silencers and suppressors out of the purview of the National Firearms Act and treat them more like non-Title II regulated firearms. So your pump-action shotguns, lever-action rifles, and some of the other more traditional firearms where we don't have a million hoops to jump through before we can take possession of it. Now, the name of the bill is the Hearing Protection Act. And I love the title because really this is all about protecting our hearing. And I'm sure some people are going to scoff at the title, but I will point out that when the federal government agrees to spend almost $800 billion and call it the Inflation Reduction Act, apparently the title and the subject matter of a bill really do have no correlation, do they? But I digress. The preamble to the bill specifically states that this bill, to amend the Internal Revenue Code of 1986 to remove silencers from the definition of firearms and for other purposes. So as you might be aware, the National Firearms Act was drafted and passed in 1934. Silencers and or suppressors were added to it through the Gun Owners' Rights Act of 1986 when President Reagan was in office. So how does the bill accomplish this task? Well, the first thing it does in Section 2 of the bill is it removes silencers and suppressors from the IRS Code, Section 5845, which authorizes the Internal Revenue Service to tax these items at $200 an item. In addition to that, in Section 3, this law would basically make obtaining a suppressor no different than how we obtain any other non-Title II or non-NFA regulated firearm. And in fact, to accomplish this task, what this bill does is it amends 26 U.S.C. 5841, a statute which looks a little bit like this, and it adds a new section in there, right here, which reads as follows. A person acquiring or possessing a firearm silencer in accordance with Chapter 44 of Title 18 United States Code shall be treated as meeting any registration and licensing requirements of the National Firearms Act with respect to such silencer. So, yes, This bill would basically say, listen, you're going to go fill out a 4473, you're going to go through a background check, and if you check out, you now get your silencer or suppressor. You don't need to fill out a Form 1, you don't need to fill out a Form 4, you don't need to pay a tax stamp, and you don't need to wait for the ATF's blessings before you can take possession of that item. Okay, then in addition to that, and this is really important, Section 4 of the bill takes 18 U.S.C. Section 927 and adds an additional section. Now, what this states is that if there is any state, if this bill becomes law, if there is any state which has restrictive prohibitions against individuals obtaining, lawfully obtaining suppressors or silencers, those laws are null and void. The proposed bill would take the existing statute right here, add this section right here, and that new section would read as follows. Notwithstanding the preceding sentence, a law of a state or political subdivision of a state that imposes a tax other than generally applicable sales or use tax on making, transferring, using, possessing, or transporting firearms, silencer in or affecting interstate or foreign commerce, or impose a marking, record-keeping, or registration requirement with respect to such a firearm silencer shall have no force or effect. So if it's passed into law, any state law which has additional hoops or restrictions is null and void compared to what the federal statute will now permit lawful and responsible gun owners to do. Now, there is more in this bill, and there is a lot packed into these 7 pages. We'll put a link for the bill down below so you can follow this. But in addition to that, any records that the ATF has maintained on suppressor purchases, suppressor builds, or anything like that shall be destroyed within 1 year of the enactment of the law. Section 5 of this bill specifically states, no later than 365 days after the date of the enactment of this act, the Attorney General shall destroy any registration of a silencer maintained in the National Firearms Registration and Transfer Record pursuant to Section 5841 of the Internal Revenue Code of 1986, and any application to transfer filed under Section 5812 of the Internal Revenue Code of 1986 that identifies the transferee of a silencer, and any application to make filed under Section 5822 of the Internal Revenue Code of 1986 that identifies the maker of a silencer. So yes, if enacted into law, whether you purchased the silencer or you manufactured your own silencer, any record that the ATF has of that shall be destroyed within 1 year of the enactment of this law. Okay, so like we said, the House resolution is House Resolution 95. We're going to put the links for it down below. And if passed into law, this would remove silencers and suppressors from the National Firearms Act and would require destruction of all records related to firearm purchases and builds to be destroyed within 1 year. Listen, you may have more questions about this legislation or anything else related to your Second Amendment rights. And if you do, don't ever hesitate to contact us at WashingtonGunLaw.com. Or, of course, you can call us directly at 425-765-0487. Now, let's remember, part of being a lawful and responsible gun owner, like we talk about all the time here at Washington Gun Law, is to know what the law is in every situation and how it applies to you in any instance that you may find yourself. Until next time, thanks for watching. Stay safe.